Thank you for joining us today, Minister. So, in March this year, a SG Clean task force was set up to raise national standards of hygiene and cleanliness. So, Minister, you chair this task force. So, I was wondering whether you could give us an update on the cleanliness situation in Singapore during the circuit breaker and in phase one.
Well, we came out at a time when the COVID virus was now well known to be spread by hygiene practices or bad hygiene practices, as well as interaction between people. And therefore, we took the opportunity to basically remind the population that it's not just for the COVID-19, also for basic hygiene, we have to adjust our basic habits so that whether it's COVID-19 or future viruses, we are not also inadvertently spreading them. Among others that we were putting in place then was to make sure that we eat, not share utensils, for example, as well as not leave tissue papers behind. And this, fortunately, now we don't have dining in, so a bit disrupted. But in phase two, we will come back with full force and raise the cleaning standards, both by the industry as well as to instill good habits in our population.
So now that we are in phase two, do you expect anything to change, especially now, as you mentioned, people will start dining in again?
Well, we want habits to change. We want people to be able to interact safely, not only for themselves, but also for others, and leave the table clean and hygienic in a hygienic condition for others, including the cleaners. We want to enable the cleaners to focus on keeping table surfaces clean and not also clearing up after we eat. And that means that we like more people to eat on trays, because when we eat on tray, food fall onto the tray, and then we also hope you return the tray. And therefore the table is clean, not only for the next person, hygienic condition, and the cleaner too then has less chores in trying to keep up to the standard that we want.
So the true test is yet to come, basically. And
Absolutely. And we may even resort to regulations. We may even resort to beyond exhortation, premise owners, operators, and so forth. We have to see how things evolve. But most importantly, I hope, though, that we embrace this, understanding how it affects our public health, as well as how it affects people around us. So I think our compassion, our care for the environment as well for others should be driving this and not regulations.
So, Minister, beyond just eating out and having good table manners, another issue that has been brought up in a couple of ads in the Straits Times recently is the need to flush fully.
Yes.
So can you just elaborate more on this? Earlier PUB has been telling people to half flush,
Yes.
where possible,
Yes.
to save water. So is this going against the water conservation?
Not at all. Well, half flush is meant for our liquid waste. And we therefore want to do the right thing for the right thing. And therefore, for this case of using the public toilet, usually if it's not the liquid waste, you should use a full flush. Because there have been many studies, although not verified fully, nor peer-reviewed, on issues around the hygiene of public toilets in terms of when it's intensely used, will it pose risk to other users when one of the users has COVID-19, for example. Better take caution. Cleaning in terms of how we clean, how frequently we clean, as well as advising users on the right way of using them.
Yeah, I've seen those papers, and like you said, they are not all peer-reviewed,
Yes.
but I guess it's better to be safe.
Yes, absolutely. And also it's good habit. Yes.
Beyond hygiene, COVID-19 has brought up a few other issues, including food security for Singapore, which imports more than
Yes.
90% of our food. So, can you just tell us a bit more about Singapore's food resilience strategies? Diversification has long been a pillar of our food security. So, does the pandemic, has it brought up any new lessons for us?
Diversification has worked for a long time. In fact, today we are importing from more than 170 countries and regions, which means that if one region gets affected, because of some disease among in the animals or in the farms, we can get supply from somewhere else. But this pandemic situation created situations which I would think have never in our lifetime think would happen. For example, in the countries who are producing food, they get worried about their own food security, and calls for restricting food exports cause some important food items, maybe like rice or even flour, to rise. In the meantime, where they are where they're supposed to be exported from, they have not taken care of the storage, and food just get wasted. And this, if you put it together over a long period of time, can cause price fluctuations, supply disruption. And we therefore have been thinking about what we have to do to tackle this. Actually, we have already looked at this from the sustainability point of view. What in event of a climate change scenario would we have to take care of 10 years, 20 years from now, when food supply will suffer the same kind of problem. But it's before us right now, and which is why the 30 by 30 vision that we wanted to implement, producing 30% of nutritional needs by 2030, we now call it 30 by 30 Express, to do it immediately, launch it fast, and hope to see the results within 6 months to 24 months.
Okay, 6 months, that's quite soon.
Yes, yeah. I think some of these supplies are essentials, whether they are eggs, vegetables, or fish. Some of them can be done even now because we can further diversify or even bring the farms in. They are almost kind of fixed, ready to fix up and produce. But in any case, it is not something we can wait for 10 years or 20 years to implement.
So we'll come back to local food production because I think that is an area of interest for many. Yes. But going back to diversification, I mean, Minister, you mentioned that we import now from more than 170 countries, and during the circuit breaker period, we have seen new imports, right? Polish eggs and shrimp from Saudi Arabia. But I think one important question that many of us have in our minds is, will food prices go up the further away we import from?
Well, the situation that we are facing right now, food prices can go up for many reasons. And one of them is when there's a constraint in supply, the group of people who are actually in a position to control the prices, they too can raise the price. So you want to have a situation where supply is not disrupted, because that also gives us the security of food on our shelves. At the same time, you want to sort of mitigate the possible price increases. We'll do all we can to make sure that the prices are affordable and that the food supplies are accessible. I think this must be the topmost priority in ensuring food security. You can't ensure everything together, but you can definitely ensure, and most importantly, to ensure that food is available on the table.
Yes. So, as you mentioned earlier, local production. So earlier this year during the budget debates, your ministry mentioned the possibility of increasing farming in the Neo area and also the potential of expanding more aquaculture zones in the southern Singapore Straits. So I was wondering whether you could give us any update, now that food security is so important.
Well, there is both the long-term and the short-term view on this. The short-term view is to fund what we call 30 by 30 Express. Innovations that are already existing that can now be put to practice. Even in the long term, we must be able to do all this in the 1% land area that's allocated for agriculture. So I think that's a phenomenal difficulty in implementing something of that scale. So that's the short-term view, and we already have good players, which means also that this group of players enable our new SMEs to go into new kinds of economy that will also provide jobs and opportunities for down the scale of the other companies that also will come in and become auxiliary suppliers to these companies. So that's where the excitement really is about. That will also then fit into a future and a longer term view. We already have talked about the AFIP, and then now we'll also look at Lim Chu Kang. how do we integrate Lim Chu Kang into the whole food belt so that it is not just a place where you produce food locally, it's also a place for innovation, to show, to put in R&D ideas, a place where we can also implement zero waste concepts, where the waste from one part of the industry can be used by another part of the industry. I think this is something that's quite breakthrough thinking, and also something will be very novel, something new that we can do here. And more importantly, it will also address the issues of what you should be doing or what we should be doing when the circumstances around you, particularly weather, climate, are also something you can't control anymore, or something that is not conducive to outdoor farming. So we have to be ready now, and these are all exciting development that I hope our children will benefit from. We are seeding with money, we're also seeding with R&D, and there are many players. Most of them are local, and also attracting overseas innovators who want to participate in our exercise.
So, I mean, Minister, just now you gave us a very interesting, tantalizing figure of 6 months. So would you be able to cite any examples of, what people can expect in 6 months?
Some of these innovations are in areas of like vegetable growing. Whether they are, what they need now actually is new areas, and we are now releasing MSCP, the car park rooftops, that now can be used for them and give them more space to produce these vegetables. And because they are produced close to where they are consumed, it means that these vegetables are fresh, they are pest-free. At the same time, because it's very close to where they are produced, they last longer. So there's inevitably also you can also say that's a very low carbon footprint. So I think these are all compelling ideas why we should do more of this. Much more so because they are already tested in Lim Chu Kang, in many places, to show their productivity. Now is how they scale up and then produce for our needs.
On the issue of community gardens, I think many people actually took up gardening during the circuit breaker when they were at home.
Yes.
And I interviewed a gardener who said actually that might help people feel more affinity with their food, because I mean, in Singapore, we are not an agricultural nation.
Yes.
But I mean, earlier you mentioned another part of your portfolio, which is climate change.
Yes.
So, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, the annual United Nations conference that was supposed to be held in the UK at the end of this year has been postponed to next year. So what are your thoughts on this?
Well, the conferences may be postponed, the meetings may be postponed, but climate change is continuing. And one part of climate change we must always worry about, particularly for Singapore, is sea level rise. And the way sea level rise is not something that can be disrupted because we did something differently. It is something that happens in a very slow way, sometimes accelerated by industrial activities. But stopping those industrial activities will not reverse this sea level rise immediately, which is why we have to be ready and continue to fortify, make our coastal protection better over the years. In the meantime, we must contribute to the fight against climate change. So for example, in Singapore, we have enhanced our NDC. We have also submitted our long-term emission goals and revised it to peak at 65 megaton by 2030. And halve it by 2050, and then aim for neutral net zero emission in the second half of the century. Many of our counterparts, including the UNFCCC Secretary, lauded our courage to actually put that on the table and use that to basically get other countries saying, now you see Singapore has done it, please submit this, submit your enhanced NDC too.
I think Singapore is only one of the few countries that has updated their updated climate pledge so far. Okay, now during COVID-19, there have been many reports about, improved air quality or reductions in emissions in some areas. and around the world, there are some countries who are looking at green stimulus plans. In Singapore, we have an emerging stronger task force. And how do you think this task force can balance the needs of the economy with climate concerns?
If you can recall, during the budget this year, although many people would have forgotten because of what's happening around them with COVID-19, I was really happy that almost all ministry, when they presented their vision, their view, what they're going to do even for that year, climate change, mitigation, adaptation was part of what they do. Sustainability became core to what they want to implement, even MINDEF. So I was quite elated that in the past, only Muir talked about it, but this time around, everyone was in it. So even the transport master plan talked about how public transport can contribute towards mitigating and contributing to our NDC. So all these things are already there. So whatever the new task force will implement will take reference from what we have planned, because they know that this is something that may be out of our radar for the moment, but it's something we have to take very seriously going forward.
So, okay, Minister, I mean, the emerging task force, I mean, some observers have pointed out that, some fossil fuel representatives are actually on this panel. So do you think that Singapore can do more to reduce its emissions? I mean, you mentioned that many ministries have already outlined plans to curb their own emissions, but can we do more?
Of course, I think technology is very promising, but there are technologies which have been proven in concept, but not in scale. But there are also promises in future where you would be able to solve, hopefully, the problems that you are facing today. I give you two examples. One is carbon capture. Carbon capture, utilization and storage, CCUS. These are a very interesting part of the drive to mitigate climate change. Because if we get those things right, we can actually capture the carbon and then sequester it and then prevent it from polluting and causing the climate change problem we have today. Still nascent, but it's a question of adopting and putting the right carbon price. But over the longer term, there are other alternatives. For example, hydrogen. I personally feel hydrogen would be the ultimate goal we should really going for, although it is a dangerous element to keep in our home, to store in our home. But then again, even petrol is quite dangerous to put near your house, right? If your car is parked near your home. But today, we are able to put it in a safe, contained situation where you don't even think about it exploding in your house, right? So hydrogen can go that way too. And more importantly, hydrogen is something that you can produce from water. And then when you actually combust it, it becomes water again. So I don't see how water will destroy the environment. And therefore, many countries now have come together to look at hydrogen as a long-term fuel that we probably need and use for moving us around. However, some part of the petrochemical industry will remain. I mean, look at where everything around us today. Many of the components here come from petrochemical industry, even your handphone. So for everyone who complains so much about the petrochemical industry, don't use your handphone. Don't go around transported with all these fuels that you complain about. So my point is we have to be pragmatic, but we also have to be concerned and keep pushing the boundary so that we use less of it and then find better alternatives for the long term.
Yeah, the issue of green hydrogen, I think there are some companies here that actually have a pilot plant that's entirely off the grid on that issue. But I mean, all you mentioned, like green hydrogen, carbon capture, utilization, and storage. Do you think that all these technologies could improve to the extent that we might be able to meet the net zero by 2050 recommendation in Singapore, or do you think it's still?
We better push those boundaries because it is not only a question of something academic something nice to do. This is existential. I think not only for Singapore, actually for the whole world. It will affect our food supply. It will affect our coastal sea level at our coast. It will also affect the weather. So can you imagine flying around and then because the weather is so disruptive, it tells you as you're bored, no, you can't fly. Tomorrow you come again, they say, no, you can't fly. So it is as disruptive as COVID-19. Although in COVID-19, you know roughly why and when, whereas when in terms of a very disruptive climate and all weather, it's just unpredictable and in fact more dangerous.
So thank you, Minister. I mean, now that we are in phase 2, I was wondering whether you would like to tell our audience any other words of advice or...
Well, phase 2, we have arrived at phase 2 only because we cooperated, we collaborated to observe safe distancing. Many of us, in fact, most of us stayed home, observe this distancing even when we go out to get food. Now that we have achieved this wonderful outcome where the number of community infection is in the low single-digit numbers, we don't want that to then change into a situation where we have to do the circuit breaker again. I don't think we can afford it. Therefore, it is still important for us to observe safe distancing, even when we are now allowed to eat with our friends, 5 of us together. And you know, we don't put masks when we're eating with each other. Observe the DIDs, the density, how many people should be around, and don't go beyond that 5 right now. The intensity, how long you are talking to each other and eating with each other and interacting with each other. So although you will be missing your friend, please don't stay on for 2 hours, 3 hours, reminiscing how we are missing each other for 8 weeks. Do it in 20 minutes, eat, meet, and go. And that goes for even when you visit your relatives and your friends, their homes. Don't stay too long, because these are exactly why and how the virus can spread.
Thank you, Minister, for joining us today.
Thank you.